I can still see the taillights fading, the gravel dust hanging in the Vermont air as if it didn't want to settle either. One moment, I was a passenger, a mother hoping for connection. And the next, I was just standing on the side of a narrow country road with a suitcase at my feet. My daughter Kara and her husband Evan had decided they'd had enough of me, and they proved it by pressing the gas and leaving me behind. At first, my mind went straight to logistics. My phone battery was barely at 2%. I had $40 in cash. I didn't know where the nearest town was. That instinct to survive kicked in almost automatically. Find shelter. Find a phone. Keep moving. But as the SUV disappeared over the bend, a different thought clawed its way. And what kind of mother raises a daughter who can abandon her this way? That question hit harder than the chill wind sweeping across the mountains. I tried to steady my breath, telling myself not to panic. Yet, behind the calm, I felt a breaking, a deep hurt I hadn't let myself name until now. After everything I'd given, after all the years of saying yes when I should have said no, this was the return, being left like excess baggage no one wanted to carry anymore. The silence pressed in. No traffic, no voices. Just the whistle of wind through the trees and the scrape of my suitcase wheels on uneven gravel. I kept walking until I reached a cluster of old stone buildings. And there it was, a small inn with a faded sign, warm light spilling through its windows. I didn't know it then, but pushing that wooden door open was the moment my life would split in two. The woman I had been, and the woman I was about to become. When Kara first called me about the Vermont trip, I wanted to believe it was an olive branch. She said Evan had a work conference in Burlington, and they thought it would be wonderful if I joined them afterward for a little family getaway. That word wonderful still rings in my ears. Kara hasn't described anything about me as wonderful since she was a teenager. But I let myself get swept up in hope. Maybe this was her way of reaching back. Maybe we could reconnect. I booked my ticket, packed my nicest clothes, and even splurged on a new camera, picturing us walking through small towns, laughing over local diners, building the kind of memories I'd been craving for years. The truth is, I've always been the one giving. I raised Kara alone after her father left, worked long hours at the Minnesota History Museum cataloging artifacts and curating exhibits, then left that career behind to make sure she had stability. Every time she needed help, money, childcare, a shoulder to lean on, I gave it. Saying yes became second nature. But the trip didn't unfold like I imagined. From the moment I landed at the airport, I could feel her judgment. She glanced at my tailored pantsuit and rolled her eyes so dramatically, I half expected them to stay stuck. Evan smirked and muttered something under his breath about me matching the old buildings. I laughed it off, but inside it stung. Over the first few days, the pattern was the same. They chose the expensive restaurants, and I paid without protest. They wanted to shop for things well beyond their budget, so I quietly handed over my credit card. When they decided we needed separate hotel rooms for space, I agreed, though it meant more cost for me. I told myself it was worth it if it kept the peace, if it gave me a chance to be included. The truth, I was the third wheel on their vacation. They tolerated me at best, resented me at worst. I noticed the side glances, the sighs, the way Kara's voice tightened every time I took a picture or asked a question. I swallowed my feelings because I thought that's what mothers do, take the hurt quietly and keep going. That's why, standing in the glow of the Maple House Inn that night, I didn't expect kindness. Yet when I stepped inside and saw the woman behind the counter, Nora Bennett, with her calm eyes and steady voice, I felt a shift I couldn't name yet. I didn't know it, but meeting her would be the start of a very different kind of story. I thought the worst part of that night was being left on the roadside. I was wrong. After Nora offered me a small room upstairs, I plugged in my phone with the INS adapter and waited for it to wake back up. The screen lit with a dozen missed alerts from my bank. My chest tightened before I even opened them. I knew Kara and Evan had borrowed before, but what I saw went far beyond that. One by one, the notifications told the Story Hotel charges, restaurants I hadn't eaten at, even a spa day. Then came the real blow transfers marked with my name, but not my hand. By the time I scrolled to my savings account, my stomach had dropped. What should have been $6,000 years of careful planning for my retirement was down to less than $900. I sat frozen, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Betrayal has a weight. It presses into your chest until you can't breathe, and for a moment I thought I might actually collapse under it. I raised Kara, alone. I worked nights, skipped vacations, said yes to every request, believing that loyalty would someday be returned. And here it was, my own daughter draining everything I had, then abandoning me like trash on a roadside. Nora must have seen the color drain from my face because she set down a cup of tea in front of me without a word. I told her, halting at first. Then, with a rush that left me shaking, everything I'd just discovered. She listened quietly, her eyes steady on mine. When I finished, she leaned forward just slightly and said, "That isn't family tension. That's abuse. Financial abuse. And it's a crime." The word abuse hit me differently than anything else had. Abuse was something that happened to other people, not to someone like me who prided herself on being strong. But she was right. It was abuse. And once I named it, something shifted inside me. The devastation didn't vanish, but a sharper, colder clarity settled in its place. I wasn't going to crumble. I wasn't going to let Kara's choices erase me. Nora gave me a small, almost conspiratorial smile, like she could see the decision taking root. She stood and gestured toward the back of the inn. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "I'll show you something behind here. The old mill barn. Maybe it's time you see what's been waiting for you." That night, for the first time since Kara drove away, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost resolve. The next morning, Nora led me through a narrow gate behind the inn. The grass was damp, the air sharp with the smell of pine. We stopped in front of a weathered barn, its wooden doors swollen with age. She pulled out a heavy key and worked the lock. With a groan, the door swung open, releasing a rush of cool, dusty air. Inside, my breath caught. Piles of furniture stretched across the dim space, draped in faded sheets. Stacks of crates lined the walls. Everywhere I looked, there were shapes waiting to be uncovered: chairs, trunks, boxes, frames. It was as if time itself had been stored away here. I tugged at a sheet and revealed a carved oak chest, the craftsmanship immediately familiar. My fingers traced the details, and in that instant, something I thought I'd lost came alive again. My old training, my years at the museum, surged back with every detail. I recognized the dovetail joints, the patina of wood, the way an object told its story if you knew how to listen. As I walked deeper into the barn, my eyes adjusted, and more treasures came into focus. China sets, shelves of books, framed prints stacked in corners. The air smelled of dust and possibility. I hadn't felt this awake in years. Nora watched me with a small smile. "I've never known what to do with it all," she said gently. "But you see things I don't. Maybe we could figure it out together." a partnership. Split the profits. Her offer stirred something bold in me. For the first time in years, I pushed back instead of giving in. I told her that if I was going to take this seriously, it had to be real, written down, with clear terms. And if my skills were going to turn these forgotten pieces into income, then it should be 60-40. To my surprise, Nora didn't argue. She simply nodded and said, "Done." For the first time in a long while, I felt like more than a burden. I felt like a woman with purpose again. Then, as we cleared a space near the back, I pulled a sheet from a small, dust-covered canvas. Even in the dim light, the paint seemed to shimmer with life. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just another forgotten item. This was something more. A week later, Nora and I carefully wrapped the small canvas and drove south to Boston. The highway rolled past in shades of gold and crimson, autumn leaves clinging to their branches like reluctant farewells. My nerves hummed with every mile. I had handled fragile artifacts before, but this was different. This wasn't museum work for a paycheck. This was personal. We arrived at a converted warehouse near the harbor, the kind of place where history lived quietly until someone knew how to read it. Inside, an art specialist named Dr. Evelyn Hart greeted us. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp, the kind of person who could tell truth from forgery at a glance. I stood by, holding my breath, as she unwrapped the canvas. The painting caught the light and seemed to glow. She leaned in close, tracing the brushwork, checking the signature, running her fingers just above the surface without touching it. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Finally, she looked up. Her voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, but the words made my knees weak. "It's authentic. A Bierstadt study, mid-19th century. With the right documentation, it could fetch between 15 and 20,000. For a moment, I could only close my eyes and let the relief wash through me. After all the hurt, all the betrayal, here was proof that my skills still mattered, that something valuable had been placed in my path. It felt like a gift. But then she hesitated. She tapped a key on her computer and turned the screen toward me. "There is one issue. According to estate records from the 1980s, this piece was listed as missing from a collection tied to the Prescott family in Vermont. It might have been sold quietly, or it might not. Without clarity, auction houses will hesitate." The words sank into me like cold water. Missing. The kind of label that cast shadows over even the brightest discovery. Driving back to Vermont, the canvas resting between us in the back seat, Nora tried to lift my spirits. "We'll sort it out. There's always a trail. Documents, receipts, family papers." I nodded, but the weight of it pressed hard on me. For years, I'd been told I was too much, too needy, too dependent. Now I was staring at proof of the opposite, that I had the skills to untangle history, to establish truth where others saw only gaps. That night, as I set the painting gently on a table at the inn, I made myself a promise. I would not let it fade back into obscurity. I would track its story, line by line, and prove that I still had the strength to bring light to the past. In the weeks that followed, life at the Maple House Inn settled into a rhythm that felt both steady and strangely new. Mornings were for cataloging Nora and I, pulling sheets from furniture, examining china, cross-checking books against old reference guides. My hands grew dusty. My back ached, but I felt more alive than I had in years. Afternoons meant research. I'd sit by the fire with my laptop, digging into auction records and estate inventories, piecing together the histories of forgotten objects. Sometimes it was just a few dollars earned on a worn trunk or a chipped vase. Other times, it was hundreds from a set of silver flatware or a collection of early New England glassware. The first check from an auction house came in the mail one crisp morning. It wasn't a fortune, but when I held it in my hands, I felt something deeper than relief. I felt capable again. Proof that my knowledge had value, that I could stand on my own 2 feet. I even called my sister, Linda. That night, she asked if I was all right, if I needed money, if I was ready to come home. I surprised us both when I told her I was better than all right. I was building something new, something mine. Nora and I began to talk about the future in hushed, excited tones, a proper business, maybe even a name Reed and Bennett appraisals. The idea of permanence made me smile in a way I hadn't in years. Then, just as the future started to take shape, the past walked through the inn's door. A tall man with silver hair introduced himself as Douglas Lane. In his hands, he carried a worn leather folder stuffed with family papers, and he was looking for me. Douglas Lane introduced himself with the kind of calm presence that immediately quieted a room. His voice carried both formality and kindness as he explained that he had been researching family history tied to the old estates around Vermont. When he opened the worn leather folder in his hands, I felt a shiver of recognition before he even spoke another word. Inside were faded documents, marriage certificates, land records, old inventories scrawled in looping script. As Douglas laid them out on the table, he explained that my great-grandmother, Margaret Hale, had once lived just a few miles from where we were sitting. She had left for Minnesota with her new husband in the 1920s, but before she departed, she entrusted part of her dowry and family heirlooms to relatives here in Vermont, too ill at the time to bring them all with her. He pointed to one record in particular, a detailed inventory list of trunks, furniture, jewelry, and artwork. My breath caught when I saw the description of a small Bierstadt study meticulously noted, exactly like the painting Nora and I had found in the barn. Douglas looked at me with steady eyes. By inheritance law, those pieces belong to you. You're the last living descendant directly tied to her line. I stared at the papers, my mind spinning. For months, I had believed I was nothing more than a burden discarded by my own child. Now here was proof that the very items I was uncovering weren't random at all. They were mine, not by accident, not by charity, but by right. The weight of it brought tears to my eyes. All my life, I had poured myself into others, giving away pieces of myself until I had nothing left. And now, against every expectation, history itself was giving something back. Nora placed her hand gently over mine, grounding me in the moment. I could see the excitement in her eyes, but also pride, as if she'd known all along that there was more to me than being someone's abandoned mother. That evening, we stood together in the barn, carefully rewrapping the Bierstadt painting. In just a few weeks, it would be transported to Boston again, this time for the December auction. My pulse raced at the thought not just of the money, but of what it represented. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of belonging. These weren't just antiques. They were my family's story. And now, it was my turn to carry it forward. The call came late one evening. Seeing Kara's name on my screen after months of silence made my heart lurch. Her voice was softer than I remembered, threaded with something that almost sounded like remorse. She spoke of missing me, of wanting to rebuild what we had lost. For a moment, the old part of me, the part that had longed for her approval, wanted to believe her. But time and distance had sharpened my instincts. Something in her tone didn't sit right. She insisted she wanted me to come back to Minnesota, that she and Evan had been seeing a therapist, that they had changed. I gave her the space to talk, letting silence do the work. And when she finally paused, I simply told her I would think about it. That night, from my window above the inn, I heard voices drifting from the hotel across the way. I recognized them instantly, Kara and Evan. Their words carried clearly in the Vermont night. They weren't speaking of reconciliation. They were plotting. Evan pressed her, saying this trip was a waste unless they could convince me to hand over money. Kara's voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. She said, "One way or another, we're not leaving empty-handed." Any trace of doubt vanished in that instant. My daughter hadn't changed. She had only refined her schemes. The next morning, I shared what I had heard with Nora. Together with a local attorney, we crafted a plan. If Kara wanted money, we would give her the illusion of it. With their help, I set up fake accounts, populated with fabricated balances and staged transfer documents. I agreed to Kara's suggestion that she and Evan help me move my supposed earnings safely to American banks. What they didn't know was that every step was monitored by financial crime investigators. For days, Kara played the role of attentive daughter. She hovered at my side, offered advice, even smiled at me in ways that once would have melted my heart. I watched her with a calm I hadn't known I possessed, knowing every keystroke she and Evan made was evidence piling against them. 3 days after they flew back to Minnesota, Kara called again. Her voice was tight, panicked. The accounts were frozen, she said. The bank claimed suspicious activity. She begged me to resend the funds to a new account Evan had set up. I sipped my tea, letting her desperation wash over me. I told her I knew the truth, that there had never been $2,000, that every transfer she thought she was engineering was part of a monitored trap. On the other end of the line, silence stretched, broken only by her uneven breathing. I told her calmly that it was finished. No more calls, no more manipulation. I wasn't her mark anymore. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. Betrayal had cut me open, but now, for the first time, I was free. December arrived crisp and bright, the kind of winter light that makes everything gleam like glass. Nora and I stood shoulder to shoulder in the Boston auction house, watching collectors circle the room. When the Bierstadt painting appeared on the platform, my heart thudded. The bidding started at 8,000 and climbed steadily 12, 15, 20. When the gavel finally fell at 27,000, the applause felt like thunder. It wasn't just the money, though the check that followed was more than I had ever imagined holding in my lifetime. It was the validation, proof that the woman I had once been the museum coordinator, the mother who had given and given still had value, still had purpose. Over the following months, other pieces from the barn found their way into catalogs and collections. A set of Victorian jewelry went for 12,000. Early New England glassware sold to a museum in Boston. The bank account that Kara had drained now steadily filled again, but this time under my careful watch. Reed and Bennett appraisals became real, with a sign hung above the refurbished barn and a tidy contract binding us as equal partners. Clients began to call, some with dusty trunks in their attics, others with family estates in need of sorting. Each day, I found myself waking with a sense of anticipation instead of dread. Yet the greatest shift wasn't financial, it was inside me. I no longer saw myself as a woman discarded by her daughter. I was someone who had been tested by betrayal and had come out not broken, but stronger. I learned that family can wound us more deeply than anyone else, but I also learned that resilience can be built from that very wound. I still think of Kara sometimes. There are moments when my heart aches for what might have been, but I no longer carry the weight of her choices. I carry only my own, and they are enough. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt abandoned, overlooked, or treated like a burden, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not finished. It is never too late to start again, to find your own strength, to rewrite the story others tried to hand you. The night Kara drove away, I thought my life was ending. What I didn't know was that it was just beginning. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment with your own experience. I promise I'll read them. And don't forget to subscribe, so we can keep telling these stories together. Your voice matters, and you are stronger than you think.